From the KUAM Podcast Network, this is Rlene Live, with conversation on island issues facing Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, here's Rlene.
Today is the 3rd of November, 2019 on Guam, and it is November 2nd in North Carolina for Doug Pratt. And Doug Pratt is my guest today for the podcast. I was introduced to Doug Pratt through
Division of Agriculture and Wildlife Resources.
I've been interested in birds since I was a little kid. And I asked Tino Uggan, how can I get a hold of this artist? I really would like to speak with him about the birds, more than just appreciating the artwork and the names of the birds. At the time, I didn't even know they had Chamorro names for them. But that is how I got in contact with you, and you have been just a wonderful lifeline for me since then. So I want to thank you first and foremost before we continue this interview.
No, you're quite welcome.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about H. Douglas Pratt, and what does the H, first of all, stand for?
Well, the H stands for Harold. I'm a junior, and my father was Harold, and so I was Doug. That was just the way we worked it out. I had a cousin whose father was Ben, and he was Ben Jr., and so we always called him Big Ben and Little Ben, and my mother was not going to have any of that. Little Ben turned out to be a lot bigger than Big Ben in the long run, so
yeah.
She was wise to do that. So I just got used to the name Doug and Douglas, so I go by a middle name. That's the reason for the first initial. Trouble is, the computers can't seem to figure out how to give you a first initial and a middle name. So
that's true.
I'm having to go by Harold D. a lot of times.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how it was that you were interested in birds.
Oh, boy. You're asking for a long story there.
Yes, I am.
Well, I got interested in birds as a little kid, and I'm not really sure why. I think it's just one of those things, kids get interested in things, and you never know exactly what the influence was. Nobody, taught me to be interested in birds. I just somehow took an interest in it. And I had an aunt who encouraged me in it, but she was a birder of sorts, but she was not, I didn't really even know that she knew anything about birds when I first got interested. So, that it wasn't that kind of an influence. So anyway, like so many of the hobbies that I have had in my life, this one got out of hand and turned into a profession eventually. Graduated from college with a degree in biology and then went on to graduate school at Louisiana State University to study ornithology under George Lowry, who was a fairly well-known professor there, and who also had several students who were bird artists. So this was a double whammy for me. I figured, okay, I could learn a little bit about both things at LSU, and it turned out to be a good choice and a good place for me. I went there thinking that I would end up in some of their projects in South America, but another student came the year after I did, who was from Hawaii, and he and I got to talking about Hawaii, and he had wanted to do a book on Hawaiian birds, a field guide sort of thing, for a number of years, but he didn't have an artist to work with him. And so there I was, an artist looking for a book to illustrate, and he was looking for an artist. So anyway, we sort of got together, and one thing led to another, and I ended up doing my doctoral research on Hawaiian birds, and so that got me into the Pacific. But the book we were talking about, we decided should expand and cover the whole tropical Pacific area, including Micronesia and Polynesia. So we started making trips to those parts of the Pacific, and it turned out we were real pioneers in a lot of respects. We were the first people to record the bird sounds that we found from the birds on these islands, and just learned a lot about them and put that into our 1987 book, which is a field guide to the birds of Hawaii and the tropical Pacific. And but that covered quite a few years, and that's sort of the link that got me into the Pacific. Now, the truth is, I had always had a little bit of an interest in the Pacific area. When I was a little boy, I sang in the Charlotte Boys Choir. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they did a show sort of thing. It wasn't your typical boys choir. They had a show with, acts up front, and they did a song about Hawaii. I think it was I Want to Go Back to My Little Grass Shack, some commercial Hollywood thing. And they had one of the boys dressed up as a hula dancer. And then the two of us standing over to the side flanking on our ukuleles were me and another kid. So, I don't know, I sort of got interested in Hawaiian things, and later on came to realize that Hawaii had birds that were unique to it, found nowhere else in the world, and that was a fascinating idea. And I just figured one day I'd get out there, and eventually I did with my friend Phil. I should mention Phil Bruner, who was the other graduate student who was from Hawaii, and he's one of the co-authors on the 1987 book.
When you made these moves, these trips, did you fund these yourself?
No, we didn't have to do it exactly out of pocket, although in a way you could say that they were self-funded up to a point, at least part of it. So we got some grants to help with our travel expenses from LSU and from the American Museum of Natural History, which has a program called the Chapman Grants, and we got one of those. And otherwise, I'm just financed out of pocket. In my case, I was a bird illustrator, and I had sold a series of paintings, or was commissioned to do a series of paintings for the state of Hawaii that brought in what seemed like a lot of money at the time. Now, looking back on it, it doesn't seem like so much, but it was enough to, fill the gap between what we had from grants and otherwise. So that's how we did it. I should mention that Phil Bruner, my partner in those trips, had relatives and friends scattered all over the Pacific. So in many places that we went, we didn't have the cost of hotels and things like that to deal with, because we could stay with friends.
Well, that always helps out. So even though your interest in birds existed as a child, when did you become an artist? How did that occur?
Well, kind of simultaneously with it. I never set out to be an artist, and in fact, I rarely call myself an artist. I call myself an illustrator. Okay. And I have a quotation that I use as the tag on my emails. It's from Norman Rockwell, and he says, roughly, some people have been kind enough to call me an artist. I've always called myself an illustrator. I'm not sure what the difference is.
I was going to say, what is the difference?
My definition, the way I would say it, is that an illustrator does pictures of things. In other words, if you're trying to describe something, it's easier to have a picture of it sometimes than to describe it. So, an illustrator is like a nonfiction author, whereas an artist is creating something, hopefully something nobody else has done before, so it's completely original. And I would compare that to somebody writing fiction. So I'm terrible at fiction writing, and I have no aspiration to do that. And likewise with doing creative art, I just don't have any interest in that. So I do pictures of birds, and I have done other natural history subjects. I've done mammals and reptiles and plants of various kinds, flowers, things like that. Birds in their environment. So that's what interests me, and so that's what I do. They're pictures of things. So I illustrate, and I quite literally have illustrated quite a few books, so I'm listed as the illustrator of the book. That's
a very important distinction, because similarly, I share that same definition that an artist is an original idea. It's something that is conceived in the mind of the artist and then transferred into communicating, some kind of feeling or idea in the art that is drawn. What if you're using something that already exists and then you transfer that to a different medium? I agree that that's really more illustrating. But even still, you're considered an artist. So
well, in the general public, people call anybody who does pictures or images of any kind, that's called doing art. So,
right.
Well, I always say, I try to make the distinction that, we have the phrase arts and crafts. Well, illustrating is a craft. It's not necessarily an art, but it's equally valid. And it's not anything to be embarrassed or ashamed about. I'm proud to be an illustrator. I don't want to be an artist.
Right.
So when people say, "Oh, well, you're not really an artist," I say, "Well, yeah, that's right."
Well, I don't think they need to go out of their way to say that. You know that, but
Well, that has happened a few times.
I'm sure. I know. You know, that's the thing about people. They just can't just celebrate the work the joy that they get from your work. For example, I have become more involved in birding because of your influence. I'm taking pictures of the birds. I share them freely on WhatsApp and email and whomever wants to learn about it. And there's a lot that I've learned that I share with them as well. And they're just surprised that the birds are here and that they really do draw a lot of comfort and joy from looking at the beautiful artwork that God's created with these birds.
In a very short time, you've become a very, very good bird photographer. And I'm tickled every time I see an email from you in my emails, because I figure, this is going to have some great pictures with it. They're not always great, but usually they are.
I must admit that my time and effort invested into this work is the same from beginning to end, but what's different is the equipment. I'm on your website right now, and I'm looking at your bio, and you're holding an illustration of a bird with a beautiful background of plants, and I'm guessing that these are the plants that this bird is standing on or whatever. I'm not sure why.
Let me interrupt you for a second. This is a good comparison.
Okay.
I take pictures, but I don't consider myself a photographer, whereas you are a photographer because you work at the photography. The only reason I take pictures is to have reference material to make those background paintings like you're looking at. So, I'm just taking pictures. I'm not trying to do photography. Sort of like an artist compared to an illustrator.
Right, and with me, I love taking the pictures of the birds, and as a result, I've become a birder by doing that. Mm-hmm. And I've, of course, my interest drags me into, I want to learn more about this bird. Where does it come from? What does it eat? And then the behavior. I am so thrilled at watching them for hours, Doug. I just can't pull myself away from them sometimes.
Well, that's a good thing for science anyway, because you'll learn something by doing that. You have already. You've discovered some things that were very interesting in behavior of the yellow bittern, for example. So you're not wasting your time.
No, I hope not. And I will take the advice that you've given me to submit that to Cornell. It's just, I like you, it's like I'm reserved because it's like, is this really worthy to submit? But it's field work. Explain to the listeners why field work is critical to all aspects of what science does with these animals.
Well, you've got to go out and look at the subject you're studying, and that's how we learn things. I always tell people when they say like you did, is this worth adding to the collection there? Well, they don't have that many recordings of things like that to start with. But even if they had a whole bunch of them, you never have too much information. You often have too little to answer a particular question, but you never have too much. And so the more the merrier, and as time goes on, things change. We need to document what's happening at a particular time in history, because in 100 years, these birds may not be around, or things may have changed completely, and we want to be able to document how it was right now, so that people looking back will have accurate information.
Okay, so that brings up a few other points, but I'm not going to go there right now. I want to kind of generally progress to the reason for certain extinctions.
This is Rlene Live, and we've got more coming up in just a moment.
Buenas and Havre. I'm Lacey Martinez Francisco. If you're hungry or have a passion about everything food, then I've got just the show for you. With me. Each week I bring you Foodie Call, a show about all aspects of how we Guamanians enjoy our cuisine, preparing it, consuming it, sharing it, using it as social currency, and talking endlessly about it. We also profile people in our community who are masters of their crafts in working with food. Whether you eat with your eyes or can't wait to fill your stomach, or if you're a perfectionist about the process, you'll enjoy Foodie Call right here on the KUAM Podcast Network. So lock in our show by subscribing to our feed on SoundCloud, on iTunes, on Google Podcasts, or on your favorite podcatcher platform, and get our freshest episodes delivered right to your device when we're done cooking them. We'll see you then, and we'll make you a plate.
Now, more Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Now, let's go back to your interest in the Pacific birds. Where was the first island west of Honolulu that you visited and started studying the birds? And what does studying the birds mean with Doug Pratt?
Well, it involves using every piece of equipment you've got, and of course back in the days, this was the 1970s, that Phil and I were doing our work. Phil has a small museum at BYU, Hawaii, where he's a professor now, and he was collecting specimens of birds to put in that museum, and many of those specimens have turned out to be extremely valuable. We don't do as much collecting of bird specimens as we used to, because birds are getting scarcer, and you have to be careful about things like that. And of course, it's always done under permit and all of that. But that was one aspect of it. I was, of course, taking pictures, things for reference. If I could get pictures of the birds, that was great, but I was taking pictures of the plants and the habitats and other things that you could do. You remember, this was back in the day of film photography, and film was expensive, and processing was expensive, and so you were limited in how much you could take, and you didn't have the lenses and the cameras that you have now, and it was really hard to get good bird pictures in those days. It's a lot easier now. Not to say that it's easier, everybody would be doing it and getting great stuff, and well, to some extent, I suppose they are compared to what we used to have. But anyway. That was part of it. And, of course, making notes on the behavior of the birds that we were able to observe. And then an important aspect of this for me was recording bird sounds, because nobody had ever recorded bird sounds on any of these islands before. Now, the recordings that I made in the 1970s are now accessible online at what's called the Macaulay Library, which is a thing at Cornell University, or part of Cornell University, I should call it. What used to be called the Laboratory of Ornithology. I guess it still is. The sound and photograph collection is the Macaulay Library. But you can look for a particular species of bird in Micronesia, and if you pull up the collection that they have, the recordings are listed one by one, and you can go through and listen to them. And if you look at the recordings, you'll find my name on quite a few of many of the ones from Micronesia. I've done that. It had never been recorded before, so I felt like I was a real pioneer in that field.
No, you were. The National Park Service here, they have a little museum down at Tinian, and they have some sounds of those birds. Did you contribute your recordings to them?
Yes, I did the recordings that they have. Okay. Well, you wouldn't call it a tape, but it was a CD at the time that I was able to put together. And this was quite a while back, but I had the opportunity to visit there and hear the things played in the little museum. And the lady who was behind the desk at the time remarked that she said every time she hears those bird songs, it makes her cry, because she had grown up on Guam, and she was old enough to have remembered hearing the birds before they were all gone. And she said it's just a different place without those background sounds that you probably didn't even notice at the time. But, looking back, she says, it just brings back my childhood. And I felt like I had done something completely non-scientific, but something that was valuable to that woman in particular.
Well, it did a lot for me as well because my interest in the birds came from sound. We had a bunch of fruit trees in the backyard. My mother was just had this need to plant something that her mother told her to do. She said, you must plant a tree every day. And so my mother interpreted that into planting a fruit tree every day. And so our backyard was filled with fruit trees, and the tuturica, the entire flock would cover the abas tree. But when they would ripen, those birds would come and they would just pick, and the noise, the chirping, their calls was so loud it would wake me up in the morning. I was really tiny. I was propping myself up with pillows to be able to reach the window just to look out at them, and I always got in trouble because I was always late getting ready. But they fascinated me with their quick movement. And then, so it was the sound of those birds, and I too remember the sound of the birds. I never knew the names of the birds until my association with you. So yeah, you've affected me in a very big way.
Well, I'm pleased that that's the case.
Yeah, and I'm sure that my passing of these photographs and helping other people has also affected them. So the reach continues, and hopefully it will continue to go. So how far did your illustration of these birds go? And how much of those photographs that you're holding on this front page of your website on your bio?
Oh, I have no idea how many. If you're talking about how many birds I've painted in my life, I couldn't even fathom a guess. I wouldn't even give you an order of magnitude. I have no idea. I'm sure it's thousands, but I have no idea.
Wow.
That.
And okay, so let's just talk about this one that you're holding. You're wearing a khaki pants in your bio page. And how long does it take you to illustrate that picture that you've got?
Well, I have a snarky answer to that question. I get asked that a lot, and I'll give you the true answer first, which is given a bird that's not particularly complicated. In other words, a fairly ordinary-looking, non-complicated bird. Like complicated, I mean something like a peacock,
right,
or a wild turkey. Well, that's complicated. You've got a lot of things going on there.
Mm-hmm.
But just an ordinary brown and white bird, a little brown job, whatever you want to call those. A bird like that takes me about an hour to paint. If I've got the drawing all done on the paper and I just start painting, putting the paint on the paper, it'll take about an hour. Now, the more complicated birds, it depends on how complicated, so it goes on from there. Mm-hmm. But you realize what I just said. I've already got the drawing done, and
yes,
I've got it transferred down to the paper and all of that. So there's that huge amount of the creative process leading up to the point of actually painting, which is about equivalent to, I'd say 3 or 4 times the amount that you actually paint.
Okay.
So getting ready to paint is more than the actual painting. And then the getting ready to paint also involves all the years of research,
right,
that you've been doing. So, I had a friend who gave me this idea, or overheard him give this answer, and I thought, well, that's perfect for me. Somebody asked, well, how long does it take you to paint a bird? And I said, it takes an hour and 20 years.
That's a good one. And I was going to say from start to finish, so that includes the sketching, but I didn't think about the research. And that's a very good point, because none of this is possible without the research, which goes back to the field work.
Mm-hmm.
And so from the moment you start considering it, and that's not even including, that's just the bird, but the environment that it's in, right, and the behavior of that bird.
Exactly. You've got all of those things. I mean, I'll go to my collection of photographs to look at when I'm making the sketch of the bird, and then I have to figure out, all right, where does this bird live? What kind of a plant should I use as the perch for it?
Right.
So then I have to go dig through my reference photographs of plants from the same area and try to find something that's suitable, and work up a composite from several different slides. Or it was slides originally. It wouldn't be slides. Now, images, we'll say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving away my age and with something like that. I keep talking about recordings as being taped.
You are dating yourself. You were born. Let's go there. Let's go there for a minute. You were born in 1944.
Right. Right.
Okay.
So I'm 75 this year. This is my Diamond Jubilee this year.
Wonderful. And we're fortunate to have you. You had a real scare there for a while. You got me very concerned. I'm very grateful that you've come over.
Well, thank you. And it was a scare for me too. There's no question about it.
Yeah, but you handled that. You handled that illness so well, Doug. You were such a champion. You had a very positive mindset throughout those years, and they were very dark years for me. I never knew if I was going to hear back, or I didn't know what to ask. I had to literally. That was very ginger for me. Because, I only got to know you then, and then boom, you had this illness that could rob you of your life.
Well, I don't mind sharing that I had stage 4 cancer, and it was looking pretty grim there for a while. I mean, it was stage 4 when it was found. I was at the time. I just said, how can I have been that sick and not known it?
And the answer is?
The answer is it's an aggressive and fast-moving type of cancer that can appear in just a matter of a few months, reach stage 4. And the only reason I even knew I had that was that one of the tumors that it produced was on my spine and was pinching a nerve that was giving me pain in one of my legs. And I went to seek treatment for that, and they eventually found the tumor. And so anyway, it was a type of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I won't go into the details.
Sure.
Really cares about that. But the treatment was a very aggressive course of chemotherapy. And I will honestly tell you that was no stroll in the park. But like you said, I really did have a positive attitude about it. I have a number of friends who are physicians, and they said, well, you're in the best part of the country. We're right here at Duke and UNC, and they have wonderful medical facilities and all of that. But you're in a great place for treatment, and, you're in good health otherwise. You have as good a chance as any to get through this. And my oncologist told me that the cure rate for this chemotherapy was 60%.
Wow.
And I thought, hey, that's 10% better than 50%.
That's right.
So it's on the positive side of the scale, and I should be in that 60% and not in the 40% who don't make it. And as it turned out, at the end of the course, I was in total remission, and I have been ever since. It's been 4 years now. So
4 years. Well, what was the hardest part of the treatment, if you don't mind? And I don't understand how you could be in stage 4 and not know. How long after you noticed the pain did you react to see a physician?
Not very long. I mean,
Okay.
it was a matter of weeks. I went in for the treatment on the nerve in January, I believe, of 2015. I'm remembering this right. And they had me diagnosed by February, and I started the chemo in March.
Oh,
So
good for you.
it was a quick trudge. It was just a total change of life, practically overnight.
Yeah.
And one of those things about chemo, and I don't want to say anything bad about it because it saved my life. I'm a great believer in science, as you know. And I said, probably 20 years ago, I wouldn't have gotten over this, but they've improved things. And chemo is unpleasant at the time, but if it cures you, then it's a good thing. So I don't want to belittle it or say anything bad about it. But I always use the old cliche: chemotherapy is the gift that keeps on giving. Because once you're over it, and like I was in remission, well, yes, but I had lingering effects from that for certainly 2 more years.
What lingering effects?
The only thing that still bothers me a lot is I have some what they call neuropathy in my feet, so that when I walk on a hard floor, it's like I'm walking on rocks.
I see. So it kind of damages your nerves?
It does.
Okay.
I have lost some of my sense of balance because it damages those little cells in your inner ear that determine your balance. I balance by sight now. If you turn out the lights, I nearly fall over. So
Oh, wow.
I can't grab something.
So there's pros and cons to every treatment, and the pro is that you're alive, and the con is that you've lost some feeling and have a little balance. But those are things you can live with, right?
Absolutely. Oh, I would take that deal any day. No problem at all. And so you have to. The way chemotherapy works, I can do this just in a hurry here.
Sure.
They give you a course that involves 4 poisons, and they don't even sugarcoat that. They call them poisons. We're giving you 4 poisons.
Right.
And the theory is that the cancer cells are reproducing very rapidly in your body, more faster than your own body cells. Well, the poisons go after the most rapidly dividing cells in your body. So it goes after the cancer cells, and it also goes after things that are dividing quickly, like your hair cells, the hair follicles, your hair growth, your fingernail growth. That's why your hair falls out. It comes back, unfortunately.
Does it come back thicker than it did before?
No. Well, in my case, it's thinner. I mean, the hair itself is just not as thick as it used to be.
Okay.
But at least I have some.
Yep.
I would have swapped the bald head for getting over that too.
Well, it's true.
I didn't have to do that permanently.
You look like the Telly Savalas of birds.
Yeah, well, I could, I suppose, and that would be fine. I would have no objection.
Right.
So I guess I'm trying to say this to encourage anybody.
Absolutely.
With a situation like this, it's not hopeless. And the doctors can do marvelous things these days. And you just, I think the positive attitude actually has an effect. I'm convinced of that. Yeah. And I'm not sure why I was so positive about it, but I was. I just never, I don't know, I just went on with my life as best I could, just thinking, well, this is just one more thing I have to deal with. And I didn't get that gloomy feeling of, well, this is the end, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I did go through all the, I heard that cliche phrase, well, Mr. Pratt, you better get your affairs in order.
Don't go away. There's more coming up with Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, and what is going on? Jason Salas here with KUM Digital, and I'm going to get you right back to your show in just a moment, but I am popping in to let you know about the amazing opportunities you have to sell your brand, get customers for your service, or promote your event on all our library of podcasts on the KUM Podcast Network. Our shows have global distribution and are sent to all the major podcast directories and devices, from mobile phones and tablets to laptops and smart speakers to integrated TVs, and all on demand. By running an audio ad on the KUM Podcast Network, you'll guarantee timely exposure and market penetration for your stuff and see immediate results no matter what your end game or actionable items are. You want to drive downloads for a cool new app that you've built? Done. Want to see your restaurant gain an instant surge in foot traffic? Easy peasy, man. Does your business need some sort of boost? All you got to do is plug a promo code that ties into an incentive and see measurable, tangible results that very same day. Podcasting is the internet's fastest growing ad platform, and you can reach customers and partners now. To find out more about our ad opportunities and how podcast plugs can work for you, get in touch with us at podcast@kuam.com. Just think about it. Your ad could be running right here instead of my shrill voice, and your business would have a big leg up on the competition. So don't let this opportunity to connect with customers, extend your reach, and increase your effective exposure pass you by. Get in touch with the KUM digital marketing experts by emailing podcasts@kuam.com, that's podcasts, plural, at kuam.com, and let us put together an effective marketing plan for your stuff, just like this ad has been. See what I did there? All right, everybody, we're going to talk to you soon, but for now, let's get you back to this podcast.
Now, back to the conversation with Rlene Live.
And I did. I did all those things, and that didn't depress me. It's just, okay, this is something I have to do, and now that it's done, it's done. So, for the future, that's a good thing.
Right. You wrote to your friends and you included me in it, and that moved me so much because I had just started to learn about you and know you, and yet the discovery of the disease, the prognosis, the treatment, and then you continued throughout with updates, and you didn't sugarcoat like you said, but I was very moved by that. It's like, wow, what a positive mindset, and I'm sure it contributed to your well-being.
Well, I guess it does, and and you were included. Don't flatter yourself too much. It was I sent that to just about everybody I know. So,
well, I'm glad you did.
In corresponding, I wouldn't want to just sort of drop off the face of the earth and you not even know what had happened. So.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. And like I said, you pulled me into your world in more ways than one. And I've always wondered about chemo because there are some people who just won't take any of it. And I know now a friend of ours whose grandson is suffering from it, and he's a champion, similarly to you, just a champion in the fight for life is worth it, is where I guess where I'm going.
Yeah. Well, and there are other things. You shouldn't feel guilty if you don't do as well as I did, because it depends a lot on the type of cancer that you have.
Right.
Like I say, mine was an aggressive and fast-moving cancer, and that's the key word right there, aggressive and fast-moving. That meant it was just setting itself up for chemotherapy. It was just what chemotherapy was right for, to go after those fast-dividing cells.
So I guess it really does make a difference when you listen to your doctor's advice, right?
I would say don't argue.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's assume you trust them to start with. And I had a really good team working with me. I was at University of North Carolina, UNC hospital here.
Yeah. You said Duke. Is that a medical hospital?
Well, Duke has a medical hospital as well, and they're also an option here. I just happened to end up at UNC, but Duke has a wonderful facility here. That's why my friend said I was in such a good spot of the country, because we had several hospitals that do this sort of thing.
Okay.
I didn't have to leave home and go somewhere else. I mean, it was a 15-minute drive to the hospital. So.
Wow. You were fortunate. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. But in those 3 years, were you able to work, Doug?
Yes, I was able to work some, but at the time, you reach a point where you say, "Okay, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm probably over this," but you aren't really. There's some mental things you have to deal with. I don't know. It took me a long time to. To use a street phrase, to get my mojo back. I just wasn't. I just didn't. I felt okay health-wise, but I just was still depressed. I think a little bit. I wasn't treated for that, but looking back on it, I think I was having some mild depression, and I just couldn't get myself moving and get things done. I worked. I did do some work, but I was just so slow at it, and. I still have a little trouble with that. I'm a lot slower than I used to be, but I think it'll all come back, and it is coming back very slowly.
Well, when you are being poisoned, I think you need to expect that your mojo is going to be affected.
Oh yeah, I think so. No question about it.
Okay, we're back up with your speed of work. Are you happy with it?
With the work itself, yes. This is a nice segue here. The work that really got me back working again was finishing that series of paintings of Guam birds that you were interested in. That was the first major piece of work that I did after cancer. And I look at it now and I think, well, that's as good as anything I've ever done, maybe better.
It's a wonderful piece of work.
I'm back with that. And
yeah. You're talking about the artwork for Frank?
Yes.
What did you call it?
It was a series of paintings, actually 3 paintings.
They're 3 paintings, but they stay together, right?
Yes. Okay. Oh, I know what you're talking about. The word is triptych, and that is actually comes from the Catholic Church. they have these three-piece altar pieces that are called triptychs, and they're usually hinged together. They're like a thing that'll stand alone, but the two edges are. It's kind of like well, people on Guam wouldn't know what a fireplace grate was or screen was, but it's kind of like that. It has the fold in, and anyway, it's a three-piece work of art that's actually a single work of art is a triptych.
So you could separate them, but they really are worthwhile putting together. They're just not hinged together.
Right. Well, the three of them together tell a story that any one of them by itself does not tell.
Right.
I guess you should say that. So,
Okay.
A triptych. It's TRIP, like trip, and then the last part is TYCH. Triptych.
What was the motivation behind that artwork that you were commissioned to do for Frank?
Dr. Frank Farrell, he's a physician in San Francisco who grew up on Guam. And he had been here, hearing the birds and knowing the birds back before the brown tree snake invaded. And he wanted to commission me to do all of the birds that had ever been known from Guam in a great big, he wanted it originally as one long piece. And I told him, well, I couldn't get a piece of paper big enough to do that, and I don't paint on canvas, so we had to modify the idea. But he had grown up, and he just wanted this as a memorial to Guam's birds as they were historically. And he was very, very patient, I have to say, because right after I was beginning work on his project, I was offered a job here in North Carolina. I was living in Louisiana at the time still, and the Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh here offered me a job, and I took it. And of course, having a real job, 8 hours a day, whatever, however many hours there were, I'm not sure. But, anyway. That meant that I didn't have the time to devote to the artwork that I used to do. I had been working as a freelancer, and that had gotten to be pretty hard to maintain. And so the job, in a lot of ways, saved my life in the way that chemo did. But it also meant that Frank's commission got put on the shelf for a while. And then the next time I was really seriously working on it was when I got cancer. So he had gone through 2 setbacks. And it took over 10 years for me to get that project done for him.
Wow.
But to his credit, he stuck it out, and I'm glad he did. I mean, he could easily have just said, well, you're just making excuses. You don't really want to do this, blah, blah. I would have understood. I would have said, fine, that's no problem.
Yeah, I was privileged to some of the discourse between the two of you. I'm not sure how I entered that, but I do have to say that, his desire to have the art was just about as compelling as my desire to learn about birds from you. So I really felt that, wow, keep pushing, Frank. Hang in there, Frank, because I felt like I had a symbiotic relationship with him in the need for you to get well. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I didn't know that you had any role in that, but thank you that you did, because I think everything worked out to the best. It helped me to get well, and he finally got his paintings, and so it all worked out.
And it's a beautiful piece of work. I mean, thank you for giving me the privilege to be able to use it in my work as well. And I want to one day be able.
Well, that was I should say that was part of Frank's goal too. Was not just to have those paintings hanging in his house, which he does,
right?
But to use them for education and other purposes back home on Guam. For him, so that's why he's tickled when we reuse some of the images from that.
Let's talk about the time when the brown tree snake entered into our wildlife. Do you remember when and how that occurred? We've learned that it kind of was a stowaway on a military ship. Is that the only explanation we have of the introduction of the brown tree snakes?
As far as we know, I mean, I know pretty much what you know about it. Nothing more, although I can I was on Guam before the birds were all gone. But I was one of the first people to sound the alarm when Phil Bruner and I first went to Guam. This would have been 1976. We noticed something very odd, which is the birds were all in the northern third of the island. Southern two-thirds, there were hardly any birds at all. I mean, we drove around that southern loop down toward the Magellan Monument and all of that area down there. Didn't see but one bird on the whole drive. It was a Micronesian starling that was sitting on a telephone wire at one point.
That's the
But
Sali.
in northern Guam, the birds were there, all the usual suspects. And so we said, something's going on here because those birds used to be in southern Guam. I thought it was probably some kind of disease affecting the birds and slowly moving up the island. And when somebody suggested that it was this snake that people have been calling the Philippine Rat Snake for years and years, well, it's number one, not from the Philippines. Number two, it does eat rats, but that's not the only thing. It eats birds more than it eats rats.
Right.
And it's from the Solomon Islands. And anyway, so the whole thing was completely mischaracterized. Somebody suggested that it was a predator, a snake at that was causing the whole avifauna to disappear. I said, well, that's just crazy. And so I was kind of the bad guy in this for a number of years. I just kept saying, this just can't be true. I wasn't alone in that, but I was being hard-headed about it. But they finally got the data that I had to acknowledge. Okay, that's it.
Well,
it is the snake.
Do you remember, Doug, how the information or knowledge about the existence of the snake came to you? I mean, you're saying that people knew that the brown tree snake was here.
Oh yeah, since World War II, and so it just had not reached that what we call critical mass.
Okay.
When there are enough of them to do damage that was clearly noticeable.
Stay where you are. The conversation continues with Rlene Live when we come back.
Hey there, podcast subscribers. Wait, hold up. You're not already permanently locked in to receive our feed of awesome on-demand digital audio shows from the KUM Podcast Network? Shame on you. But it's okay. There's hope for all of us. All you need to do is head over to SoundCloud and hit follow, or if you're on iTunes, tap the subscribe button as hard as you can to directly link up to our studios and get all of our episodes on any digital device so that you can enjoy them and join the conversation as soon as we upload them. I'm talking about phones, tablets, Apple TV, whatever. You'll be able to get to us. You can also use your favorite podcast application and search KUM Podcast Network to add us. It's super easy, super fun, super interesting, and most importantly, super free. And for anyone who's already subscribed, thank you so much. You don't need to do any of this, but if you are in iTunes, do what we do on Guam, help your neighbors out. Break out your digital jumper cables and give us a rating and a review to help our podcast reach as many people as possible. Also, you want to register your email address to receive KUM Digital Digest, our weekly newsletter that goes out every Friday by going to KUM.com and then clicking on the newsletter button at the way tippy top of our homepage. Thanks so much for supporting us, and okay, that's enough gratuitous self-promotion. Let's get back to the show.
The conversation continues now on the KUAM Podcast Network with Rlene Live.
The person who actually convinced me that it was the snake and who did the research, did the field work, was a woman named Julie Savage. And she wrote a major paper on it that I challenged at a meeting of the American Ornithologists Union back in the 1980s. And she ended up winning the argument. And, of course, I'm glad she did in the sense that now we at least know what we're fighting.
Right.
And I have not talked to her in decades, but we ended up friends in all of this.
Yeah, I know about Julie's work, and you mentioned that the mass was part of that reason. So if they were introduced to Guam right after the war, And it would have taken them up to 1976 to be able to have enough of them to have actually bring an extinction of the birds in the South. How about the reverse of that, Doug? If we maintain the population of brown tree snakes to the point that existed when they got here, what is the likelihood of reintroducing the birds back into the wild?
I would say things like that don't work very well in reverse.
Oh.
I would think that, in other words, if you're reintroducing birds, you start out with a very few individual birds as your first introduction. Well, they're still going to be overwhelmed by the snakes. In other words, the proportions are all out of kilter.
Right.
In other words, you had lots of birds and not so many snakes to start with. And the snakes just sort of gradually ate away until the birds were gone. And then, of course, they moved to some other place and do the same thing as their population expands. There are some mysteries still about the brown tree snake. One thing, I've always said, well, all right, so they have destroyed all the birds, so there's nothing left for them to eat. Why don't they just all starve to death and die?
They're eating other wildlife.
Skinks and they're eating people's barnyard chicks, and there seems to be enough protein there for them to get enough to survive and to maintain enormously high population numbers. That's
right.
Another thing that I just don't see how they do that. But
well,
that's not my field of study, and
right.
Somebody else will have to figure that out.
We know that the brown tree snake is not the only impact in the devastation of the birds. There are also other behavioral practices that existed. What about typhoons? That frequently comes through here. We know that destroys some birds.
Well, it does. There are always some birds lost in storms like that. But I always tell people that people want to blame typhoons for things like that. And I say, those birds are not naive to typhoons. They've seen typhoons before, and the birds that have survived all those typhoons have figured out ways to survive typhoons. And they just hunker down in nooks and crannies and ride it out.
Mm-hmm.
The hard period for the birds for survival is after the typhoon, because particularly things like fruit doves and the ground doves that eat fruit, there's no fruit. Everything's off the trees. There's very few insects even right after the storm, so that there's a lingering effect. Even so, all those species, and this would be true through the whole Pacific that gets typhoons or hurricanes or whatever they're called at the place you are, birds have evolved in the presence of typhoons, and they know how to deal with them, or they have characteristics that do deal with them one way or another. Now, it's not to say that typhoons can't make some major damages. If things are already at a critical level and a typhoon comes through, well, then that's another story. And we've got a case of that right now that's ongoing. This recent hurricane that sat at Category 5 over Grand Bahama Island in the Bahamas.
Right.
For 3 days. I mean, it just ground that island into a pulp. That's almost literally true. It's still a terribly desperate situation there. I've been to that island, and it was a beautiful place. And I look at the pictures now, and I just want to cry because it's just pathetic. Well, there were 3 endangered species of birds on that island whose habitat was completely destroyed. I mean, by wind and by salt water. I mean, it's just leveled. Well, I'm afraid we may have lost those birds. We don't know yet. It'll be a while, but that's just the way it happened. In Hawaii, we had a hurricane Iniki that came through in, I guess, 1992, somewhere that year, or 93. But it was another Category 5 storm, and you have to understand that in Hawaii, the native birds are all found at high elevations, and they're at high elevations to escape mosquitoes that live in the lowlands of the islands and carry avian malaria. Now, both avian malaria and the mosquitoes are introduced invaders, just like the brown tree snake was on Guam. So, it's a totally unnatural situation to start with, and the populations are very low, and they're confined to these these high elevation forests. Well, it turns out that one of the adaptations that native Hawaiian birds had for riding out a hurricane was to fly from high in the mountains down into the lowland valleys where they could get out of the wind. Well, the birds on Kauai, when that hurricane came through, did the things that they had been doing for thousands of years to escape the hurricane, but they were flying into a death trap. They all got down there, they got avian malaria and died. And they never came back. And there were at least 3 species, maybe 4, that went extinct because of that hurricane. But, that's a very special circumstance.
Right.
Birds of Guam, you get lots of typhoons. I hate to say, but
yeah.
But you do. Well, of course, I'm living in Hurricane Alley here in North Carolina, so I can't talk either. But those birds were not going to be susceptible to something like that because they were in good, healthy populations.
Interestingly enough, before I went to the Kingdom Hall for the meeting, I sent to you this Cornell University broadcast that was talking about 30% of the birds in the continental U.S. and Canada have declined.
Right.
That's a
huge... I can vouch for that just from my personal experience of growing up in North America over that period of time. There were a lot more birds when I was a little boy than there are now. It's drastically noticeable.
And what do you think is the reason for that? Are we taking over their environment by developing?
Yes. The reason for it is that there are too many people, and they're taking up the habitats, paving over whatever, and polluting the air, and all the other things that go along with development. And I don't mean to be I forget the term for it, somebody who's opposed to progress. I'm not, but it has its price.
Well, it's true. I'm neither. I believe that we have to share this wonderful place we call home, but every time we do it at the need of our growth, the population growth, it will affect the most fragile, and that seems to be the animals, right? They can't protect themselves.
Well, it certainly is so far. And,
yeah. They don't protest. They have no way to protest.
Well, they do protest in a way silently. They just sort of
disappear. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, so you've published a lot of work over the many years. How many books have you published? And you're currently working on one now, right?
Yes. The book that Phil Bruner and I were working on is still in print, believe it or not, even though the publication date is 1987. Mm-hmm. That may set some sort of a record. But I'm currently with a new co-author, Eric Vanderwerf, who lives in Hawaii, is working with me now. With a new co-author, I'm doing a book that will replace that. It will not be a second edition in the usual sense. In other words, we're not going to do a second edition. We're going to do a different book that covers the same subject.
Okay.
If that makes sense. It'll be called, the other one was Birds of Hawaii and the Tropical Pacific, and we would have called that just Birds of the Tropical Pacific, but we wanted to get Hawaii in the title so it would sell.
Yeah.
But anyway, our new one is just going to be called that, Birds of the Tropical Pacific, Hawaii, Micronesia, and Polynesia.
Okay, and how will this be different
if
it's...
use parts of the old book. So we'll use some of the reuse some of the illustrations and add new ones and redo the text, sort of using the old text as a basis. But in that period of time, since 1987, there have been a third again more birds recorded in the tropical Pacific than we knew of in 1987. So it's going to be a much bigger book. And that doesn't mean numbers of birds have increased, but just the number of species that people have seen on the Pacific Islands has increased greatly.
Okay, well now I'm one of those who has your 1987 publication, and identifying the birds is a huge challenge for me because they look similarly, and I know you can't devote an entire book to all their possible looks, but from the time they become chicks, or actually before that, when they hatch, from the time they do that to the time they become adults, And then you have you have the seasons, you have the mating period, and you have the soon after that when they start to molt. That's all so confusing because they don't look the same, but they're the same bird.
The problem is for you, and the reason you have that attitude, which is a valid attitude, by the way. I'm not meaning to criticize that.
No problem.
But the situation on Guam is such that the only birds that are going to give you any problems with identification are shorebirds and migratory waterfowl, primarily. That's what you go out every winter to shoot, or the ducks
right.
on the various ponds and birds along the shoreline. Well, those birds are notorious as two of the most difficult bird groups to deal with in the field because they have all these different plumages, and each age has its own different plumage that's distinctive, and some of them will mow partly into this and into that. I mean, it drives you crazy. And I remember as a young birder having a lot of trouble learning both of those groups of birds. They were tough. And, your ordinary songbirds, they're pretty much, once they leave the nest, they look pretty much like they're going to look most of their lives, except some birds have a summer plumage and a winter plumage, so you get that alternation. But, they look, a bird like one of our common birds, let's say the northern cardinal, which a lot of people call the red bird, and but it looks the same year-round. Once it's an adult, it looks like it's going to look the rest of its life. So those birds are a lot simpler to deal with. And so you were kind of forced into the situation of having to deal with the most difficult birds right off the bat.
This is Rlene Live, and we've got more coming up in just a moment.
Middle of the ocean, but this paradise is teeming with people with all sorts of amazing abilities.
Bonita Baby was nothing but hair accessories. I had some little barrettes that we were making and headbands, our little knit bow headbands, and that's all I started out with. And I decided shortly after, I had been sewing for a little while that I was going to put it out there.
Whether it's artists who create visual masterpieces, creatives inspiring others, people who compose and perform moving pieces of music, athletes taking their game to the next level, or entrepreneurs coming up with innovative solutions, there are a ton of folks here doing incredible things with their gifts. And I want to introduce them to all of you.
Women, not just guys, women could come in and feel like they're there to train, they're going to be taken serious, they're not going to be hit on by dudes, they're going to have their own space. They're going to be respected as just another practitioner of this martial art.
I'm Jonagan Charfris, and I invite you to join me on the KUAM Podcast Network for Fistful of Talent, where I sit down with people discussing their visions and dreams and sharing the secrets of their success.
In the avenues of being in the creative life, and then what's the next thing.
Just subscribe to the KUAM Podcast Network on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcatcher platform, and prepare to be amazed. That's Fistful of Talent each and every Friday. Thanks for listening. And now, let me get you back to your show.
Now, more Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
These are the ones that migrate here, so I don't have a choice. If I'm learning the most difficult birds in how to identify them, then I think that's a good thing, because if I can identify this, but part of it is because they're not here year-round. Right? They come here.
What is that? Yeah. You don't get to refresh your knowledge every day.
Right. So they migrate here from September through March. And when they migrate here, they're coming from somewhere where they just finished mating. Are there immatures flying with them?
Oh, definitely. In fact, most birds you see, particularly this time of year, in what I would call the fall month, most of those are immature birds. They're birds that hatched this year. So they're young birds, and they don't migrate at the same time as their parents. Oddly enough, they are born with that map for migration implanted in their head like a chip, and they just do it. But most of the birds you're seeing now as shorebirds and ducks are birds that have hatched this year, or quite a few of them. They nest in what we call the high Arctic, up in the tundra regions, for the most part, ducks and the shorebirds. So they can't stay there during the winter, obviously, so they have to migrate. And they come south, and we're glad, as birders, we're glad they do, because they give us a big boost of excitement every year. And, at the top of the world, that's the high Arctic. You know, it opens up for 6 months of the year, and it has abundant insects and all sorts of things that baby birds need, but then it's going to freeze over for the other 6 months of the year, so the birds have got to leave.
So that's why they call it wintering, right?
Yes, yes.
You said that because of the instinctive nature of the fact that they have to migrate, they do not migrate with the parents. Do they go before the parents or after the parents?
You know, you've stumped me there. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure you can say in general. It would depend on the particular bird. I suppose most shorebirds, the reason we see the matures and the juveniles first is that they may leave first, but something in my head tells me that's wrong. So adults go and leave the kids behind, and the kids just have to figure it out on their own. I think that's how it works.
Okay, so let's talk about that window that I have, because my window's from September, maybe even early August. We start seeing them arrive. So they come somewhere in August, maybe mid-August, late August, and then they start disappearing literally from the environment about March, sometimes into May. It depends on what they are.
Right. They'll always have a few stragglers, we call them, that just for one reason or another may even stay over the summer. But that's unusual. That's not the typical bird.
Right, but let's talk about that early arrival. So I've constantly going to the same footprint that I started when you introduced me to Joe Mancuso, and that's from Jeff's Pirates Cove. Once in a while I'll go down further to Ladson, the landfill, and then I go up to Starts and, along East Agania Bay and down to the port. I had that wonderful privilege of doing 1 year on Navy Base Guam, and there are birds that I captured over at Polaris Point, and I find that the biggest attraction the birds go to are large bodies of water. Fenna, unfortunately, does not attract the birds, and I think it's because the food's just not there. You have this large lake, but there's no food.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. It's too deep for most of those birds. Even the diving ducks would probably not find what they were looking for there.
Well, the 1 year that I did go there, I went there because I was saying something is wrong. The tufted ducks are nowhere to be found. I see them once in a while when they're at Ladson, but then when I saw them, they would fly south, and I said, they've got to be going to Fenna. Well, when I went into Fenna, that's where they were. And so I was fortunate to capture that. But, I can't just keep doing that every year. The Navy has bigger issues, and I'm just a nobody researcher that wants access. So I've pretty much resorted to other means, and that's being more regular, trying to be more regular, going to the spots I've gone. I've recently found the Starts flock just this last week, so I've really been dedicating time to get back up there. I started taking pictures of the Starts flock in January 2018. Are you telling me that these ducks that are there now are possibly not the same as the ones I took last year?
Oh, no, they could very well be the same, but they'll have their offspring intermixed with them.
Okay, so when I took those pictures of those coconut ducks, that's what I call them because they ball up and look like coconuts. What threw me off?
I never thought about that.
What threw me off was one of them was really rust in the breast area when they ball up, and then the other one was light. So I thought, are these not the same? But you said they were the same. They were the pintail females.
Oh, right. Yeah.
What accounts for that difference in the look?
Well, in the case of the pintails, and most ducks for that matter, the males and the females have completely different plumages. So they're like two different species almost. Female ducks don't look like the drakes.
Right.
So the female pintails are brown, kind of rusty brown, like you described. described. And the males, of course, are very, very elegant gray and white and, beautifully patterned ducks rather than being just little brown things. There's a period of time right after nesting that male ducks molt into a plumage that looks like the female species. And some of them regrow the flight feathers early enough that they can migrate in that plumage. So when they first get here, they're going to look like females. But in the course of the winter, you're going to watch them change gradually, sort of feather by feather, until the spring right before they head north. They're just beautiful male ducks. So they're kind of masquerading among the females right now.
You know what? I'd completely forgotten that point. So that means that I could be looking at the male and female of all these species, including the shovelers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you could. The shoveler is one that's known definitely to migrate in that female-like plumage and then gradually change over the winter. I see them do that in Hawaii all the time.
So I don't know if what I notice is correct or not, so bear with me. With the shovelers, is the eye coloration is different. In the male, it's more yellow, more, what do you call that color?
I'd call it golden, actually.
Golden, okay.
Yeah.
Whereas the female's a little bit darker, right?
I think so. Actually, I can check. I've got my own book right here in front of me.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I'm saying that is when I was watching the plumage change last year as I tracked them, the one with the golden eyes turned into the drake.
Yeah, that's right. The females have brown eyes.
Okay, good. So then this is a pair that I've spotted yesterday and the day before. So yesterday I counted them. I counted the flock. I sat at one pond for about 2.5 hours, 3 hours, and just when I decided to give up, the traffic of the golfers forced me to go another route. When I took that other route, there were the pintails, and there were the shovelers. So now I'm wise. I'm going to start looking at these different ponds because I had a tendency of just going to one and then, bearing it out. But I counted a total of 16 in this flock yesterday, not including the Eurasian widgeons, which I'm still convinced, Doug, one of them has got to be an American. I just have to prove it.
I looked at it closely, and I don't think so, but it's possible.
I'm convinced.
Images of those two that are really hard to tell.
Right.
And, so you just have to wait and see how it looks. To keep following the same bird and see how it looks in a few months.
Yes, and I intend to do that. I really want to get there when they're bathing themselves, which is so cute, and then when they stretch their wings so that I can get the under wing part for you to convince that there's at least one American widgeon in this group. So that's going to be my job to monitor them this year.
Yeah. Well, that's a rare bird, and if you can document that for a second year, that would be great. You had one last year that we were all excited about. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So tell me about the book.
It's going to be a different format from the old one, with the color pictures on the page facing the text. So there will be fewer species per plate, as we used to call them. You wouldn't call them plates now. I'm not sure what you call them, but a page with pictures on it. That has changed because of technology over the years. In 1987, we were still doing what they called 4-color offset, and color printing was extremely expensive, so the publisher always wanted you to have as few color plates as you could possibly get by with.
Which is sad.
A lot of birds onto that. Well, yeah, but it was just the fact of life at the time.
Right.
Now, with the digital techniques of both photography and printing, well, color is about the same price as black and white, so you can have lots of color in a book. So we have the privilege of having half of the pages as color pages in this book, or nearly half. There's some things in the front and the back that make it not quite half, but it'll be a different format, like I say, and having the fewer birds on the page to compare, you can show a lot more detail. I'll be able to show birds in flight that I only showed perched, and that sort of thing. More information is all I can say, and I think that will really be a good thing.
I think so too. Now, you said something that it will not be a second edition. Why have a second edition rather than what you're doing, which is a new book?
Well, it's got such a different format and it's got a different co-author on it.
Okay.
So both the publisher, which is Princeton University Press, they and I agreed that we should avoid calling it a second edition, although functionally that's what it is. But it's really a new book.
I like the idea of new books. I don't get the second edition part. I think that a book should be about new information, and just call it a different book.
Well, there's an old saying among writers that new information, people say, oh, well, there's all this new information. The reply is that's what second editions are for. It's stuff that you didn't know when you wrote the first one. So in that sense, it is the second edition. But there's been a tremendous amount of new information to come out in the last 20 years, just unbelievably. So it'll be a different book.
Okay, well, look forward to it, and I definitely want a signed copy.
Well, don't hold your breath. It's not going to happen in months. It'll happen in years. But you come back to working on it.
You always say that, but then you produce. So I'm just saying, I look forward to my copy.
Yeah, well, it won't be decades. So,
right.
We'll look at it that way.
Don't go away. There's more coming up with Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Hey everyone, I'm Ken Nicholas and I love movies. No, I mean I really love movies. And if there's one thing I enjoy more than dissecting plots, questioning casting choices, and challenging scenes, it's debating with my friends and their opinions about their favorite flicks.
You can't handle the truth!
So join me and my cohort of cinephiles each and every Tuesday for Real Talk, right here on the KUAM Podcast Network.
I live my life a quarter mile at a time.
We cover best of lists, actors' top roles, and don't pull any punches when it comes to giving props about what's big on the silver screen, streaming, and on video.
As if!
Just make sure to bring your own popcorn.
Those locals forever, now let's go!
So lock in our show by subscribing to our feed on SoundCloud, on iTunes, on Google Podcasts, or on your favorite podcatcher platform.
That's wig, Janice. What's it made of?
Your mom's chest hair.
That's Real Talk, each Tuesday, right here as part of the KUAM Podcast Network. Speaking of which, let's go back to your show.
I guess the only thing I can say is I'll promise to keep rocking and rolling and making better films.
Now, more Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
This is one of the things that, when I got ill, I just had to put on hold. The publisher understood that.
Right.
Well, when you're well, come back and talk to us. And we've just, last year, signed a new contract. So.
Congratulations to that. Now, you mentioned something about mentoring and the difficulty in learning about birds. What is the largest challenge about learning about birds?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
Well, you complimented me by saying that I've been able to grasp, what you're trying to convey to me. How has it been different for others?
Well, I don't know that it is that different for others. It's just, some people are brighter than others. That's it. It's just the facts of life. And, the smart people get things quickly, and the people who aren't so smart take a while. So,
well, thanks for that, then.
I like to say that that's just the way the ball bounces. But I don't know. Your question was, what's the biggest challenge in
learning about birds?
In learning, just from the student's perspective. Well, it's something that you have not looked at critically before, and you have to learn how to look at things differently. and I won't say look at things better. You just have to look at them differently. I had a close friend who was a musician friend of mine, and he was taking a degree in general studies at LSU. He was an undergraduate, and I was a graduate student. And he knew that I was the teaching assistant in the ornithology course. And so he had to have 1 credit in science. And he thought, well, I'll just sign up for this ornithology. And, the teaching assistant, how bad can it be, blah, blah, blah. So he did. And he told me after he graduated a couple of years later, he said, of all the courses I took as an undergraduate, the most important one to me was ornithology. And I said, well, why? He said, that was the only one that significantly broadened my horizon. He said, I never saw birds before. I never noticed them before. I can't go anywhere now and not see birds and wonder what kind of bird that is.
Exactly.
And sometimes go and look it up.
Exactly.
He said, it's given my life an aspect that it didn't have before. So.
To the same credit, the bird photos that I share with people on my contact list, I send it out on WhatsApp, and the commenting back, it's like, where did you see this? This is on Guam. It's like total disbelief. And then I'll get photographs from cell phones. They'll take a picture of a bird. They see it, while they're out and about. They go, Rlene, you have changed my life. I can't now not look for birds. And that's wonderful.
Yeah, I think so.
That's just absolutely wonderful. And so, when I'm driving, I'm always on the lookout for birds too. And I think we've created more awareness of them. So, on Guam, when people say there are no birds, what does that mean when the birds are here?
Well, it partly means there are no songbirds, the kind of birds that you have in the trees in your backyard and used to have in the trees in your backyards on Guam. That's what most people think of when they think of birds. They're not really thinking about ducks or sandpipers or seabirds, that sort of thing. All of those groups are still on Guam because they don't depend on Guam as a place to nest. They're just passing through or hanging around on the ocean and that sort of thing. But the birds that used to build their nests and raise their families in the trees around the places you go, those birds are pretty much gone, and it's a shame.
Okay, so since we're there, those birds gone means extinct, correct?
Yes. There are some of them that can be brought back. I should make a distinction here. A bird that is extinct is gone forever, never to return. So you need to use that term precisely. We use the term extirpated for a bird whose population in a given place has died out, but it still survives somewhere else. For example, the Mariana fruit dove has died out on Guam. It's extirpated on Guam. But you can go to Rota and see them, or to Saipan.
And are they the same species?
They're the same species. And there's evidence that they always did move from one island to the other, at least occasionally, particularly, for example, after a typhoon. The fruit doves, if the typhoon hits Guam and it doesn't hit Saipan, they might fly to Saipan just to find something to eat. So we have seen, for example, fruit doves on Guam in recent times. It just a bird shows up here and there.
Right.
And it's one that just happened to fly there from Rota, probably. So, that sort of thing, you can restore those. If we find a way to manage the tree snakes, we can restore that. And we can restore quite a few of the others. The one bird that is gone absolutely and forever, never to return, is called the Guam Fly Catcher. And it was found only on Guam, not anywhere else, and it is gone. There are none in captivity. Now, you have the Guam rail, the bird we call Coco. That one has been introduced on Rota to provide a wild population, and on Cocos Island, which is off of the south coast of Guam. And, if we could control the snakes, you could bring them back to mainland Guam, presumably. Same thing for the ground doves and the fruit doves. Well, I mentioned fruit doves already. The other bird particularly is the Guam Kingfisher, which was only found on Guam, but there is a good population of them being maintained in various zoos in North America. So, they have the material to release them again if we can control the snakes.
When you talk about reintroducing birds, are the birds in the CNMI collectively, Saipan, Tinian, and Luta, all the same species that used to be on Guam?
What we have are some birds that are what we would call endemic, meaning found nowhere else. Some birds are endemic to the whole Mariana chain. In other words, they're on all of the islands, but they're not on other island chains. Within that, you have certain birds that are found only on one island in the Marianas. The Guam Fly Catcher was an example. Rhoda or Luta, I don't get the Chamorro pronounced quite right. But that island has white-eye on it. That is a rare and endangered species. It's found only on that island, and it's not on Saipan or Guam or anywhere else. Guam has the golden honeyeater. I'm dating myself there. That's what it used to be called. It's a white-eye, too. The golden white-eye is found on Saipan and nowhere else. And Tinian has a bird called the Tinian Monarch, found only on that island and nowhere else. So, some things are throughout the chain, and, like the fruit doves, the ground doves that I mentioned. The northern Marianas have a different kingfisher from Guam. Guam had a smaller kingfisher that was rusty underneath, and from Luta northward, you find this white-headed or white bird with white underparts and a blue back called the white-headed kingfisher.
Which, by the way,
actually, it's called, we've gone through some different names for it. It's the Mariana Kingfisher.
It's a Mariana Kingfisher, and when you and I exchanged email on that, you said that you had always thought, based on the call of that bird, that it was what?
It has been thought for many years to be a subspecies of a species of kingfisher that's found all the way from the Red Sea to Samoa. It's called the Collard Kingfisher. They all look sort of vaguely alike. But this bird sounded different to me, and it looked different as well. But I didn't really have a good idea of what it was until I looked up the call of a bird that's found on islands in the Solomon Islands and northern New Guinea called the beach kingfisher. And it looks for all the world like this Mariana kingfisher. In fact, it has two color forms, just like the Mariana bird, because the one on Luta is a little different, has a little more blue on the top of the head than the others do. And the same thing with the beach kingfisher. But the beach kingfisher is much bigger, so nobody had really made that connection. And I said, it's just another one of those collared kingfisher things, that are all over the place. Well, then I found a recording of the beach kingfisher, and I thought, well, there you go. That sounds just like the bird on Saipan, or certainly enough like it that I thought, well, there's a good chance. And then a woman named Alice Sidwa and a team of researchers ran the DNA on kingfishers of the whole region, and lo and behold, the Mariana kingfisher comes out as a sister group, we call it, to the beach kingfisher. So my instinct was right. I couldn't have proven it without the DNA to back it up. But it's nice to be right.
Yes, it is. It's wonderful to be right. So speak to me then about speciation. I mean, if a bird, and in association to that, I have to ask you, who are the bird name gods? Because they have confused me to no end. One year it's this name, the next year it's another name. Why do the names change so much?
Well, the Latin names actually don't change that much. Some DNA research in recent years has made it seem like they change more often than they do. They're pretty much, and there's a set of rules called International Rules of Zoological Nomenclature, and everybody goes by that for any kind of animal name.
Right.
But that's the Latin name, the scientific name. English names, there's no no standardized list of names for the whole birds of the world. There are several different ones. I mean, we have lists of English names for the birds of the world, but they don't always agree.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if you find that something, that the relationship of some bird, but because of a DNA study, like the thing with the kingfisher, well, as it turned out, we didn't have to change any names in that case, but well, I guess we did, because now we're calling it the Mariana Kingfisher instead of Collard Kingfisher.
Right.
But that's where you have to change. Well, then you've got to come up with names that everybody agrees on, and we're getting there. I've been one of these people that everybody loves to hate on one of the English names committees, and I've been through a lot of fights with those folks, because even the people on the committee don't agree among themselves. And when you've got several competing names in English, then it's always a problem. But the International Ornithological Congress, which is a thing that meets every 4 years, it's sort of the Olympics of ornithology, if you will, met last year in Vancouver, British Columbia. And that was the closest one in years, so I went to it. And one of the things that came out of it was a meeting, a round table with all of the various competing English names authorities in the same room. And the upshoot of it is that they're going to try to reconcile all of the different competing English name lists by the next Congress, which will be in 4 years. It's just the Olympics in that sense, too. And that one will be in Australia.
Oh, okay.
So, anyway, we may eventually have an official list of English names for all the birds of the world. Maybe.
Stay where you are. The conversation continues with Rlene Live when we come back.
Start your day the KUAM way with our new streaming shows on Facebook Live each weekday. Here's your starting lineup. Mondays will give you a glimpse into our morning meetings with the KUAM news team. Tuesdays, join our group chat with Chris Barnett. Wednesdays, it's crime time with the island's law enforcers. Thursdays, get the latest info with Dave Delgado, who's in the zone. And Fridays, we get Fit AF, fitness and fun. And the best part, all our shows are completely interactive, so you're directly part of the conversation. Join us Monday through Friday starting at 9 a.m. Start your day the KUAM way.
Now, more Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Don't hold your breath, but at least people are working on it.
Well, and the reason I'm asking is, when I want to identify a bird, and I run things through you, so thank you very much for always being there to cover me, but when I try to identify a bird, I went back to when I started this, and I'm looking at my folders, and it's confusing me, because it's like, wait a minute, what is that bird? Is that the same as, oh my goodness, it's the same as this bird. Because the name is different, and then when I send it for verification of an identification of the bird, you tell me, it's this name, and then I look online, and it's got all these other names, and it's like, I want to know who these bird name gods are, and I didn't know I know one.
Well, guilty as charged. I'm not an actual member of that committee, but it's the one that the International Ornithological Congress had its own committee, chaired by a man named Frank Gill, who's an ornithologist in New York and a good friend of mine. And I'm an advisor to that group. I'm not actually on the committee.
So you're not a god, you're a super god.
Well, I'm a consultant. Whatever you want to call it.
Honestly, I appreciate the work. I appreciate the fact that someone's trying to name it. But as a student who's trying to be on top of things, it throws me off, because it's like, when did this change? How do I get notification that this particular bird name has changed?
Well, you won't, and that's part of the problem. And as I say, when you're dealing with English names, well, this would be true. Pick a language, and they're going to have their own names for all the birds of the world. Well,
which we do in Chamorro. I'm so.
Well, there you go.
I'm so happy.
Have all the birds of the world, but at least the ones that you know locally.
Well, you know what's interesting? What was interesting for me is that our ancestors actually named the migratory birds.
Well, the ones that were common, for sure.
Yes.
The ones that only show up a few a year, they wouldn't have so much. But certainly the whimbrel and probably the common green shank had a name. Maybe.
Well, the doolilly word, the word doolilly.
That's the tattler.
Right. It is a sound that is associated to all those shorebirds. And so they just call them doolilly.
The Hawaiian name for that same bird is ulili without the D on it.
Oh, really?
So, yep. Actually, a lot of what we call local names or native names, whatever you want, what term you want to use,
right.
Like the Chamorro name, a lot of those imitate the sounds of the birds.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of English names imitate the sounds of the birds.
The characteristics too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful that somebody did it. So I use what's there, and I submitted the names to the Chamorro Language Commission, and they came out with an official list. So now I'm following that, and I keep
you're one of the naming gods.
No. I'm just like you. You're not the artist. I'm not the god. I'm just educating people on what it is. I'm the transition committee.
Yeah, there you go.
But so anyway, having said that, I remember now that you sent me an email that you were going to Canada, but I didn't realize, that this meeting was what the purpose of it was, and just how far-reaching.
Well, that wasn't the purpose of the whole meeting. And in fact, I didn't know that meeting was going to happen until I was there. So it was a surprise, but it turned out for me to be the most important thing that happened while I was up there.
Absolutely. It's far-reaching.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the other day, Doug, you mentioned at the beginning of this interview that you've come out to the Western Pacific. How far out did you come when you were studying the birds?
Well, pretty much the area that is covered in my field guide. In fact, that's what we were doing, was to go to the islands that were covered by that book. Now, Phil is married to a woman from Tahiti, and he had lived in Tahiti for a year and studied birds there and in other parts of French Polynesia.
Okay.
And so we didn't need to include that in our expeditions. But we didn't know anything about Micronesia. And we made, several trips to Micronesia. And one that went to Fiji and Samoa. And that kind of filled in the major island groups that we needed to cover. So between the two of us, we had those covered. So our field work, or certainly mine in the 70s, was in Hawaii, Micronesia, and then the western part of Polynesia, Fiji, Samoa.
Okay, someone sent me a photograph of a bird, one of the boobies, the brown booby, that they found in one of the outer islands of Yap on their way down to Satawal. And it's actually the first island, I believe, that you run into from Guam heading to Satawal, or heading down to Yap. And I was told, and actually it was Leo Pangilinan, who's the executive director of the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, who sent me the photo. And he said that when they were on it, there's no human habitation. It's all birds and wildlife. And he said that it was so loud because there were so many birds. And I thought, that's the kind of place I want to go. And that's the kind of place where the birds don't know humans. They don't have any distrust for them. So you could come up close to a bird and photograph it for hours without it skidding away from you.
Right. Well, if you think about it, almost all of those birds are what we call seabirds. They come to islands to nest and raise their young, and then they go out to sea.
Exactly.
And they don't come to land after that. So they don't really have any opportunity to develop a fear of humans the way ducks do, for example, that are hunted all the time. So when they come to land, they're not afraid of people. It's just something else, any more than they're afraid of a seal or a turtle. They're just another animal.
Another species, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
The only other thing that I can think about is, your interest in music. How does that dovetail into the work, or is that just a separate passion of yours? Do you write songs about birds?
I do not. That's just like I was describing that I'm terrible at creative writing. Well, I can't write a song to save my life.
So what is the interest in music?
I can play, and I play a couple of instruments. Because I'm from North Carolina, I guess, but I got interested in the folk music of this area, and in particular bluegrass, and so I play with some bluegrass groups around here, and when I do that, I usually play an instrument called a dobro, which is a type of steel guitar. But my real claim to expertise has to be on a different instrument, which is called an auto harp, and you probably don't even know what that is.
Nope.
But it's a box of strings, basically, 36 strings with some bars that you push down to control the chords you're playing. And anyway, my grandmother played it, and that's how I got interested in it years ago. And for some reason, I just seem to have a knack for that instrument. And since I just won the bragging rights, I can tell you that just last month at a festival in Winfield, Kansas, that hosts the thing every year, I won the International Auto Harp Championship.
My goodness, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. I was pleased to do that. I have won it once before, but it was a long time ago. It was nice to.
So is
part
this
of my recovery? I'm back.
Yes. What is the name of the instrument? It sounds like a precursor to a guitar.
Well, it's a type of zither, actually. In other words, it's a box with lots of strings on it strung across the top, flat, and it was originally designed to be played sitting on a table. But people have learned to pick them up and hold them against the chest and play standing up that way. So, it's turned out, it's one of those things that was probably invented as a toy, and it turned out to be more of an instrument than the inventor even realized he was inventing. So, there are enough people that play it to have an international championship. But,
well, congratulations for that.
But I just, I have a knack for music, I guess. I like music, and I like playing music. But I didn't want to go to all the tedious hard work to be a professional musician. That just didn't appeal to me, really.
Right.
It's a wonderful hobby, and that's all I want it to be.
A hobby,
Everybody should have something that just is completely different. When I get just completely burned out painting birds, I play music.
It's not going to happen.
Well, no, but I go back and forth between them. I find that I can work intensely on painting for about 3 months. And then toward the end of that period, I'll just start, at the first of it, I'll be cranking out maybe 5 birds a day, at an hour apiece and some peripheral time. By the end of it, I'll be having trouble getting through 1 or 2, and I'll think, okay, it's time to take a breather, and that's when I'll play some music or write something, do something completely different for a while.
And that's really an interesting point, because I'm the same way with the work. My birding, time takes me away from what I have to do so that I can get it done. I have to step back away from it, and then I recharge myself and come back, and I just breeze right through what I got to get done that I've been kind of lagging on,
Absolutely. I think a lot of bosses don't realize that their employees need a break, maybe fairly frequently, to stay fresh. You're just, you can't just trudge away at something forever.
Well, I'm my own boss.
Well, I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm the same way. You can't be self-employed for 30 years and make a living at it without being a pretty difficult boss. So,
I always tell people I'm harder on myself than you, so be grateful for that.
Oh, well.
Hey, Doug.
Well, I'm pretty hard on you, so that's saying something.
I am very hard on myself. I drive.
I wasn't at first,
really?
But I learned that you could take it, and you took criticism in just the right spirit. As a learning opportunity, and not something you would take personally.
I submit everything I do for criticism. I want to flesh it out. I want to be able to hear and I have no problem when people say, nope, that's not right. That's what I'm asking you to do when I send something to you. You know?
Well, that's what I figure, and I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
And like I say, it's so much fun opening one of your emails because I know there's going to be a really nice photograph in there somewhere.
Thank you.
Maybe a new bird for Guam, or who knows.
Yeah. So tell me why I struggle with the gray-tailed tattler, and you're saying the wandering tattler doesn't come here, just the gray-tail?
No, you have more gray tails than wandering, but the wandering does come to Guam. It's more of an Eastern Pacific thing, and the so-called gray-tailed is more of a Western. I hate that name, by the way. That's one of those name controversies that I've been involved in. A much better name would be Siberian tattler because it nests in Siberia, whereas the wandering nests in Alaska. In general, that's not being precise, but anyway, they stuck the name gray-tailed on it to distinguish it from the wandering tattler, which also has a gray tail.
But one is longer, right?
No, not really.
Oh.
They look very similar, and it has nothing to do with the differences. Have nothing to do with the tail.
Oh.
I don't know why they focused on that. I don't know where that name came from, but it's what I call a stupid name. It's like calling a crow the black-headed crow when it's black all over.
Right. Hey, you forgot that Luta has the crow in the Mariana chain.
Yes, and Guam used to have that. I was forgetting about the crow, but that's one that could be brought back.
Mm-hmm.
From the birds on Luta. Although they're not doing all that well on Luta, it's an endangered species.
Right.
That's another one we have to keep an eye on.
I asked you, but I don't think we answered it. How does speciation occur?
Don't go away. There's more coming up with Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
What's up, fellow online addicts? I'm Asha, and it's literally my job to scour the internet every day to see what you guys are saying about our stories and to see what you're snarking on. If you got beef with a particular island issue, we'll give your voice an extra boost on Trend Spotting. It's our weekly rundown of everything that's got you buzzing and what conversations you can't look away from. From the serious to the silly, from ludicrous news to legit headlines, from the weirdest Instagram posts to the most retweeted stories to the insane DMs we get, we're going to show you the deeper side of what's making group chats, what's trending, and what you're sharing. So check out Trend Spotting on YouTube, on Facebook Live, and on IGTV, all at KUAM News. If you've got something to say, sound off. We'll find you. And now, back to your show right here on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Now, more Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Okay, now you're asking me for an hour lecture in about 5 minutes. All right, I'll give you the best I can for a short period of time.
Okay.
Since we're talking about islands, that's very convenient because I always use islands as the best example, or the easiest to understand example. All right, let's say you have a bird on island A, and then there's island B sitting over here. And this bird on island A, for one reason or another, let's say a flock of them decide to fly over to island B, and they like island B, so they stay there and they start reproducing. So now you've got two populations of this bird, one on island A and one on island B, and at first they're just the same thing. But it turns out there are things about island B that are a little different from island A. It might have some different other species on it than island A does, or it might have a different kind of forest, a slightly different habitat. Anything, it doesn't matter what it is, it's going to be different. It's not going to be identical. Well, and then you have things that just sort of happen by accident. Let's say the birds on island A sing a song that goes tweet, 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 and then the birds on island B sing the song the same way at first. But then when they've been separated for a long time, and we're talking millions of years here, maybe just by accident and by drift or whatever, the birds on island B are singing tweet, tweet, tweet instead of tweet, tweet, tweet. Well, that might be an important difference to the birds. When it comes time to pair up, they're going to look for a bird who sounds like what they're used to hearing. So a bird from Island B might not recognize Island A. You might say that they now speak different languages. This happens with human languages, if you think about it.
Yes.
You know, there's this whole family of Polynesian languages, Tahitian and Samoan and Hawaiian, the Maori and all of those things. And there are certain similarities among them, but they're not identical, and they're not mutually intelligible necessarily. Some of them are. But that just sort of happened by custom and by happenstance. Well, the same thing will happen with birds. Birds have culture, too. And so this provides what we call an isolating mechanism. That's something that keeps those populations isolated if they come back together. Let's say a flock of birds from Island B decides to do the same thing that the ones from Island A did many, many millions of years ago and fly back to Island A. And they like Island A, and they settle in. But these Island A birds are not talking the way they talk, so they don't get together and mate. And they are at that point two different species because their gene pools have completely separated.
Okay. Very interesting. And
So
it's
a biological species is a population of birds that can all interbreed among themselves, but not with other groups like that. So that's how they form. It's one of many ways, but that's a fairly straightforward one in birds.
Yeah, that's very interesting that it would be the sound that distinguishes that, because I thought it would be the sight. I thought there was something. I mean,
it can be. I could equally have said, well, the birds on Island B, instead of having a white stripe over their eye, they have a yellow stripe over their eye. You know, it could be anything that happened either by accident or because the environment was shaping it in a certain direction. We don't know, but those differences, and usually it's a combination of things. I just isolated one thing to talk about. Could very easily be plumage color differences, differences in song that I talked about. Could be a difference in size even, any number of things. Any way that the two birds can tell themselves apart and on that basis do not interbreed.
that's pretty fascinating to me because, like I said, I thought it was associated to perhaps visual, since they plume. They have different plumage, right? They have seasons.
Right.
So I thought for sure.
Things. They're visual and they're auditory.
Of course.
And they those two things work together quite often, and both are important in birds.
Okay.
But in some other things, in mammals, a lot of times the differences are in what the animal smells like, what we call pheromones. You know, that might separate them. But it's less visual because they are mostly nocturnal. They don't see each other in the same way that birds see each other in the daytime. So color is not so important to mammals.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the ducks earlier. The drakes are just incredibly handsome creatures.
Yep.
Incredible. Why do they need to molt like that for a female to agree to mate?
Well, that's another hour lecture on something that's called sexual selection. And in that case, what's driving the evolution of those gaudy plumages is the female birds themselves. In other words, they'll pick. If you go to New Guinea, there's a spectacular group of birds called the birds of paradise.
Oh, they are.
And they're incredible-looking things. The males are, but the females all look kind of alike. They're all little brown things.
Right,
you know,
pretty bland.
Yeah, so, but it's those females that are bringing us the males that we're so impressed with.
I've watched some of the videos on YouTube, and it just cracks me up to what extent the male will go to convince the female, that I'm worth breeding.
Absolutely.
And I was reading up on the boobies, how the feet of the boobie is one that attracts the female. That you could tell whether the DNA was a good one that you wanted to mate with. And I thought, if only women could be that selective, right?
Yeah, right.
And if men could only be that performed, I mean, it's incredible the degree that they go through.
Humans are too smart. They've learned to imitate things that are not really true to them. But so you have to deal with frauds. Birds are not usually frauds. They're usually exactly what you see is what you get.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that part of this is that animals, specifically birds that we're talking about, don't mate for pleasure, where we do.
Well, that's true. It's a strong instinctive force to mate, but they don't appear to get much pleasure out of it. And mating is a very brief sort of thing. It's almost like a kiss to us, and it's just a few seconds and it's over, and then they act like nothing ever happened.
But in addition to that, it almost appears as if it's only seasonal. It's like, are they sterile when they're not in mating season?
In some cases, yeah, I think that's right. I think the eggs are only ready at a certain time of year, and it wouldn't they wouldn't even try to mate at other times of the year. Whereas humans are ready to mate all the time.
All the time.
But even most mammals are not. Out of that season, they're just not interested.
That crossed my mind as I observed the birds here. It's like, why don't I see these birds mating? The only birds that I see mating are the native birds, which, like the kak-kak and the sali and the koko, which I've caught in the wild, and the pulatat. But I don't see that on the migratory birds. So I thought, do these birds lose their sense of mating instinct when they leave their home?
Yeah, well, that's right. They don't have that in their repertoire when they're on as you said earlier, the wintering grounds. They're on vacation then. They can't be bothered.
Well, and then if they did, they would have to leave their offsprings here. Where would they migrate to? Right?
Exactly.
So it would break.
It wouldn't survive there.
Yeah, it would break that course of wintering and summering and mating, or spring rather.
Yep.
It's spring.
Yep.
Fascinating what you could learn. Absolutely fascinating what you could learn from these things. And what an appreciation. You've turned me on into a wonderful hobby. I appreciate it so much.
Well, it has been my pleasure, and I hope it will continue for a long time. You've been a great help, actually, to me, because you have caused me to think about some things about identification of birds that I will use in my new book.
Aww.
And it will be new information, and plus some photographs that I'm going to use. I'm going to rip off as models for some of my illustrations.
You're welcome to use my photos if that's what you're saying.
Oh, well, I knew that a long time ago.
Yeah. So, Doug, what do I ask, or that you're talking about specifically in identification?
Well, I learned a lot about how to tell American widgeons from Eurasian widgeons when we were trying to identify that bird last year. And we went round and round. You and Gary Wiles and I. You might mention Gary Wiles.
Yes, of course.
But I dug out every source I could find. I looked at probably thousands of pictures online. I just kept digging, and I think we finally got it nailed, and that'll be in the new book. And I'll have illustrations to show those things.
Wonderful.
And, so it's greatly improved the final product.
I felt very compromised because I'm the newbie, and there's there's Gary Wiles and you, and all I can say is no, I'm convinced beyond a doubt this is the American widgeon, and I was so grateful when that all came together, because I honestly...
Well, it may be. I'm not saying it's not. It just, at first glance to me, I thought it was Eurasian, and the one bird with its wings up definitely was. So, we'll just have to see how that bird looks later on.
Well, it's my mission to look for the underpit.
Yeah.
Like we say, I need to go back for fast shots. That's what we call underarm here. So I need fast shots for the birds. Okay, well, is there anything else? Oh, and by the way, what other proteges have you had other than me? I'm curious.
Oh, gosh, I'm just on spur of the moment. It'd be hard to list a bunch of people. But
you don't have to.
Yeah.
Have they been students?
Oh, yeah. Well,
okay.
As you recall, I was a teaching assistant in the ornithology course at LSU for a couple of years.
Yes.
And, I had all those students, and so, I would count those among the many. But particularly among bird artists, people always ask, well, you mean you didn't go to art school to learn this? And I said, no, art school would have taught me out of it. Bird artists learn by talking to other bird artists. That's been my experience, and I think that still is the case. We share information, and if I have a question about something relating to painting techniques or whatever, I'll call one of quite a few bird artists that I know and ask, and they're always willing to share. So it's a matter of just the community teaching itself, I guess you could say. That's true among birders as well.
Yeah, we don't. There's a small group of birders on Guam, but you know, to me, birding is such an isolated hobby that when I go out and I'm minimizing my movements, the sound, I turn off my cell phone vibrate. I mean, I check it frequently to see if my husband's trying to reach me or if there's, one of my kids, but I really minimize my movement to just around my body, nothing else. And if I get thirsty, I slowly move to get the drink, but if I have another person there, I can't control their movements and they're behind me. And I find that bringing someone else with me spooks birds. So now I'm doing it by myself to be able to...
Well, you're doing photography along with birding, and that makes a difference.
Okay.
And, I'm kind of like you. If I'm out by myself, I'm a lot more stealthy. If I have somebody with me, I'm talking to them. I just can't help it. So
that's right, because it's social, right?
Yeah. But fortunately, most birds that I would go look at are either too far away for that to be bothersome, or they're just not bothered by it.
Recently I've learned that if I stay in the cart or if I stay in the car that I'm driving, that the birds will come. I mean, yesterday a bird came within 8 feet of me.
Stay where you are. The conversation continues with Rlene Live when we come back.
Middle of the ocean, but this paradise is teeming with people with all sorts of amazing abilities.
Bonita Baby was nothing but hair accessories. I had some little barrettes that we were making and headbands, our little knit bow headbands, and that's all I started out with. And I decided shortly after, I had been sewing for a little while that I was going to put it out there.
Whether it's artists who create visual masterpieces, creatives inspiring others, people who compose and perform moving pieces of music, athletes taking their game to the next level, or entrepreneurs coming up with innovative solutions, there are a ton of folks here doing incredible things with their gifts. And I want to introduce them to all of you.
Women, not just guys, women could come in and feel like they're there to train, they're going to be taken serious, they're not going to be hit on by dudes, they're going to have their own space. They're going to be respected as just another practitioner of this martial art.
I'm Jonagan Charfris, and I invite you to join me on the KUAM Podcast Network for Fistful of Talent, where I sit down with people discussing their visions and dreams and sharing the secrets of their success.
In the avenues of step, being in the creative life, and then what's the next thing?
Just subscribe to the KUAM Podcast Network on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcatcher platform, and prepare to be amazed. That's Fistful of Talent each and every Friday. Thanks for listening. And now, let me get you back to your show.
Now, more Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Oh yeah, that's a well-known technique among birders. A car or any vehicle is as good a blind as any, because birds don't see you in the vehicle. They see you as part of the total thing, and that vehicle is not threatening to them.
That's right, because it's so huge.
It's just another animal in the environment. It's like a cow showing up. That they wouldn't be afraid of.
You just called me a cow.
No, I didn't. You'd be just a little tiny thing inside the cow. That happens with mammals and with birds. I was on an expedition to Kenya one time, and we were out in the what's called the Masai Mara, and we were in a Land Rover, and the local guide there said, "Now don't get out when you stop. Don't open the door. Just stay in the vehicle." They have these things with pop tops that you could stand up and see perfectly well, so you didn't have to get out. But we watched a group of cheetahs feeding on a kill, and when they got through eating, they came over and flopped down in the shadow of the Land Rover.
Oh my goodness!
And the driver said, if one person had set one foot on the ground, they would be out of here like a shot. But they just don't see you as a threat. And birds are very similar.
I've been sharing these photos that I've been taking recently with my friends in Africa, and now there's a mission to get me down to Africa. So I'm hoping that Bob will agree to go visit them next year, and they're showing me these incredible photographs. We don't have iridescence in the same way that their birds have. I see the sali, the drongo here. If it's caught in the light, oh my goodness, the beauty of that black just turns almost blue. Wow, but they're such a tyrant bird. Their personality, they're very aggressive. They attack everyone.
Well, starlings in general are. When you go to Africa, if you get there, you'll find a whole group of really spectacular-looking starlings with these remarkable iridescences to them. They're very beautiful birds in Africa. They're not all black.
I want to thank you. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you'd like to mention?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we've covered it pretty well.
Well, just my curiosity over things. The speciation part is something that I really wanted to learn from you. And then, of course, the why they don't mate when they're not at home. That's something that I just took for granted, but it came up in a discussion recently, and I said, birds don't mate when they're not where they're not from. They only mate where they're from.
That's all. It's all in a pattern of hormones. The sex organs of birds swell and recede depending on the season, and they swell right before the mating season. So that's all under genetic control, and so that's how it goes. In fact, birds where the males and females don't look just alike, so you can't tell them apart when you just see them out somewhere. The way if we have a specimen of those birds, the only way we can determine the sex is to dissect the bird and see whether the sex organs are large or small, and whether it's a male or a female. But if we're near the mating season, they'll be large and easy to tell. In the off season, sometimes you can't tell even whether it's a male or a female because the sex organs have shrunk up so much.
That's a point that I ran into in Saipan in one of my trips this year. For example, the ground dove. We mentioned the ground dove earlier.
Mm-hmm.
According to...
And that's one that has strikingly different colors from the male to the female.
Except that according to the farmers there, the birds are all in maturation the same color with the white chest. And that when they're immature and just like, I guess, a sub-adult, they all look like the female, which we call the fatsy or muddy look, right? But apparently, according to the farmers who see this all the time, they say, no, that's not true. When they become adult, they're all the same color. They're all the iridescent maroon with the white chest.
Well, we've had this discussion before in emails, and not meaning to be rude, but I think the farmers are wrong. And the reason for the confusion is it's not really their fault. A lot of the farmers on Saipan are from the Caroline Islands. And the Caroline Islands also have a ground dove, but it's a different species. And in that one, the male and female adults all look alike, but the young birds are different, or that solid brown color. But that's not the case with the one in the Marianas. And I think they've just, passed on this information as folklore for years and years, and nobody's gone out to check it out in any particular way, so they just continue to pass it on. And it would be true if they were still in, say, Chuk or Pohnpei, but they're not.
Well, you know what I did? Because I always have to find out. My mind does not rest if I don't know. I went to the Department of Fish and Wildlife there, and I asked one of the biologists, and he showed me a specimen of the male-female, and he said that they already checked this, and this one definitely was female, and this is the male. So there is that. Now, you mentioned earlier the permits that were allowed to get specimens. How do you capture these birds for specimens?
Well, the technique that Phil Bruner used back in the day, I probably wouldn't be able to do it these days. But just the shotgun works as well as that.
Okay,
So,
they net them
I
now.
didn't want to bring that up, but
Right.
yeah. And then if you don't want to do that, we have things called mist nets that are nets that are essentially invisible to the bird.
Right.
And they'll fly into them and get caught. And you have to put them up in strategic spots and all of that. But that's another way to capture them.
Yeah, I think that's what they do now. But, I mean, at the time when you guys were doing this, there were different laws, so that's understandable. We certainly don't encourage anybody to shoot birds now.
And back in the day, nobody thought twice about carrying a shotgun somewhere, on an airplane or whatever. You couldn't do that.
You can't. And, there was a time, too, especially here on Guam and in the Northern Marianas, where people ate birds. My grandfather ate birds. As a matter of fact, Doug, just the other day, my mom, she's 87 now, so she's getting very elderly. And we said, Mom, what do you want to eat today? And you know what she said? A pigeon.
Oh, well, there you go.
And I said, Mom, we can't eat that. And she said, hi there, that's what I'm missing. I thought, oh my goodness, my mom. Because when she was a preteen, they would shoot the ground doves and eat them in saipan and the tutut.
Oh, there was a hunting season on them right up into the 1970s.
Really?
Yes.
A hunting season.
There's this is another. I hadn't even thought about this, but for a while the DAWR was issuing hunting license stamps. They were little stamps that went on the license to pay the fee. And I know about that because I designed one of them that had the fruit dove on it. So I know, and that would have been in the early 1980s. So even by then, I think they were still doing some hunting. But of course, by then there was hardly anything to shoot.
And where would they put this seal or stamp?
I don't know. I don't know the details about that.
Okay. Do you have a copy of that stamp?
I do. I have one.
Can you take a picture of it and send it to me?
I think you already have pictures of it. I sent it to you.
Okay.
Way back when.
Then I have to look. I have to look at my Doug Pratt folder. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Wow, that's amazing. My mom brought that up, and I thought, oh, Mom, we can't shoot the ground doves anymore.
Yeah. Well, you can't now, but they certainly did back in the day. And the hunting was not what drove their numbers down. It took something really different from that.
Well, I thank you for bringing that back up, because I think the insecticide spraying, it's not just the brown tree snake, but certainly the brown tree snake aggressively diminished their population here.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. I think there's probably more to the story than the brown tree snake, but the brown tree snake is definitely involved. There's no question.
Yeah, I mean, I don't buy the brown tree snake only villain story either, because impact, the development of Guam is very different. We've cleared a lot of habitat for homes. The villages are very different. Yeah. Even my mom's backyard looks different. So, eventually things do happen, but I think it's all human intervention in any regard.
Of course.
Yeah, so the CNMI, gratefully, the CNMI is doing a real aggressive job in trying to stop the entry of the brown tree snake, because they've seen what happened to Guam. And so there's my last question. Why do we wait so long before we do something to stop invasive species? Just the other day, I finished a book on that I was reading that was for my traditional fishing practices, and I learned that this woman who came out here who dove and took pictures of the fish actually mentioned in 1951 that the coconut beetles were here, and they were attacking the trees up in Nimitz Hill. 1951, Doug.
Yeah.
So why do we wait so long?
Surge all over Micronesia, and was only controlled fairly recently.
So why do we wait so long? Is it just money?
Partly, and because it's not an easy thing to do. It does take money, and it takes getting some politician interested in it. And it's just a bunch of birds. Who cares? It's that sort of attitude. And, for example, when they were trying to appropriate some money in Congress to control the brown tree snakes on Guam, there were senators and representatives who laughed at that.
U.S. Senate.
Yes. So there you are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically it's ignorance, and it's, well, I have said that people are stupid. I can't say I haven't, but I don't think human beings are necessarily stupid, but they are often ignorant. So
they can't have their head in the sand. They just can't. They see it. It's just not an issue.
Well, but in the case of the tree snake when it was being derided, I don't know if you remember, there was a senator who was famous for giving what he called the Golden Fleece Award. This was years ago. And his name is on the tip of my tongue. I can't think of it right now. But anyway, the Golden Fleece Award went one year to the bill that appropriated money for controlling the brown tree snake. And, he had built a reputation on, this is showing government waste and all this stuff. And it was just an easy target. It was a snake. Everybody hates snakes. So he didn't really know anything about it. He just thought, this is a good one. We can make fun of this and get some political whatever. He was from one of those Midwestern states, and surprising to say, he was a Democrat. This is a long time ago.
Oh.
1970s, 80s, when they were first trying to do something about snakes. And
Senator Robert Byrd?
No, it wasn't Robert Byrd.
Okay, because he's from West Virginia.
This guy, and as soon as I hang up the phone, I'll think of his name. How it goes. So anyway, look up the Golden Fleece Award.
I am.
Right up, probably.
I am, but it's not. That's where I got
too much history.
Yeah, it was Senator William Proxmire.
That's him. Proxmire. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, well, he's probably not with us anymore.
I'm sure he's gone, but
what did
I hope it's to his just reward.
What did he say about it? It wasn't worth what?
He awarded the Golden Fleece Award one year to the appropriation for controlling brown tree snakes on Guam.
Well,
what a waste of government funds, and that's ridiculous. That was a perfectly appropriate expenditure of government funds, but it shows why we don't control things in the early days, like we should.
Just the attitude, right?
People interested in it. You got to have a disaster before anybody will do anything.
And even then, it takes a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Even then. Okay, well, Doc Pratt, what a wonderful pleasure to be able to spend these 2 hours with you. But I still think that there's much more. However, I don't want to keep you awake. I'm sure you're way past your bedtime now, and thank you very much for making this time.
Well, it was my pleasure, actually. I enjoyed talking to you, and hope it will give people some enjoyment and a little bit of education.
Well, yes, last week I entered a podcast on the bees, and I thought, the birds and the bees, they have to go together. So I need to talk to Doug. So this is the bird. The bees came first, now the birds, and then tomorrow or next Monday, I'm going to be talking to my son-in-law, who's a master beekeeper here on Guam. Arlene's version of birds and bees, we definitely have to cover it. It's been a wonderful pleasure. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right. I'll touch base with you later.
Okay.
Adios.
You've been listening to Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network. Join her every Monday for a new edition. Log on soundcloud.com/KUAM News or listen anytime. Scroll down and click on Rlene. We welcome your feedback and suggestions. Email Rlene, RLENE, @rlenelive.com. Thanks for listening.